Please join me in welcoming Cristian, a cloud optimization specialist. And I'm not going to give away where he's at, what he's doing, and what he's been up to, but let me introduce Cristian to the show. Cristian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, John, for having me. It's been a pleasure meeting you earlier.
Yeah, so Cristian and I had a chance to work and do some things together with AWS Fest, which is Optimize Your AWS Fest that we host quarterly. But I want to jump into this podcast. And Cristian, we're talking about AWS cost performance versus optimization. And I know it's been a beat down topic, but the value of driving this home is really key. Before we jump onto that topic, how about you give everybody a little bit of backstory on yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. Hello everyone. I'm Cristian. I'm based in Berlin. I used to work at AWS here in Berlin for a while as a specialist solution architect for Spot and Graviton. Before AWS, I wrote a tool called Auto Spotting, which makes it easy to adopt Spot instances in auto scaling groups. And yeah, after September, I quit AWS, and then I doubled down on working on this tool. And I have a little small consultancy on cost optimization and optimization in general, because I don't like to just restrict it to cost. There are so many other things that you can optimize. But now, yeah, cost is a big topic nowadays. But there's also performers, there's latency, there's all sorts of things that you can leverage in your business that doesn't necessarily have to do with cost.
Cristian, cost optimization versus cloud optimization. Here's my thoughts, and I'm going to give you my humble opinion on it. Cost optimization is under cloud optimization and is a small fraction, because if you optimize your cloud environment, yes, it could mean that it's going to cost you more in some cases for a business application, but in the long run, it's going to save you a lot of costs. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and it's exactly the same. So you're in some cases you may pay more. For example, I'm thinking if you have an application that you want to optimize for better performance, you may want to add maybe a caching layer to it. So you add an elastic cache that will add a bit of cost, right? So it will not be for free, but then that cache can improve performance of your application, and that performance increase can drive, let's say, differentiation in your business niche compared to your competition. So you can get more customers, more revenue. Even if you increase the cost a bit, you could get business results much more than that increase in costs.
And I think that's really key, Cristian. Talking about that is, here's what happens. Everybody assumes that going to the cloud is going to save you a bunch of money. I'm going to do like for like. And if you think about a data center, and I think that's a real good example of you talking about the caching layer. In my data center, I didn't have this caching layer. I didn't have it available, or I would have to spin it up. It would cost me too much. You go to the cloud, you're saving a bunch of money now that your application's in the cloud. And guess what? I can add this caching layer now. So you add it, and now all of a sudden people are like, wait, why did my cost go up for this application? It wasn't, because you're not doing like for like, and really seeing that you're now enabled and able to do more within the cloud and put more behind the performance of your application.
Yeah. And also, if you go to the cloud, once you move, you can also have much more knobs that you can tweak when it comes to the sizing of your application, the scaling in and out. All sorts of options that you may not have in the data center before you move. So yeah, all that can help you.
Yeah, in the data center, you are limited to what most people refer to as t-shirt sizes. You can only fit into these templates, and that's it. But when you go to the cloud, you have thousands of different instance types available at your choosing, depending on your business application needs. I actually just posted something about it the other day with regards to what is your instance type, from compute, memory, HPC, you name it. I think there was like 6 or 7 different instance types that I listed. Cristian, let's jump on to a little bit more around this cost and the visibility around not only your cloud spend, because we are talking about AWS in general, being that both of us are ex-Amazonian. So congratulations on it.
Thank you. You too.
So let's talk about, what is your approach typically when you're talking to folks around AWS, cloud optimization, performance, cost optimization?
Yeah, I mean, as a former Amazonian, I took to heart this working backwards from the customer. mantra that we have in Amazon. And basically, I start looking at the existing spend of the customers, and then based on that, depending on what they have, maybe I sort it by cost, and like taking the biggest chunks of the cost, maybe the bigger services that they run, and yeah, trying to always tackle the biggest and the lowest hanging fruits. And I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule, which is the Pareto principle. Which states that often you have to tackle 80%. You get 80% of the results by tackling 20% of the problem space, and also the opposite. You may spend 80% of the effort just tackling the last 20% of the problem. So it's always good to see where it makes sense to invest and what kind of things to tackle first. And then at some point, if you keep iterating on this, and at some point you get diminishing returns. So that's kind of my work style, if you can say like that. Also in the way I build my tools. So I started auto spotting, tackling compute, and in particular spot, because I've seen that compute was when I started auto spotting, compute was the main cost driver where I was working at. And then like nowadays we have public information on the biggest services that generate the spend. So if you look at Advantage, they are a vendor in this space, and they publish every quarter or so, they publish this report of like the top spenders that they see across their customers. So what I can use from that information is looking at that top of spend drivers, and then I can see, okay, I see that EC2 is one of the biggest spend drivers. I have something for EC2 when it comes to spot, but I could also look into like savings plans for compute and so on. And then taking the next cost drivers, which for example, I did for EBS optimization. There's also RDS in there where I'm looking into building something next. So these kind of things, like looking at the biggest fish in the pond and always trying to catch that. Yeah, that's kind of my mantra.
Cristian, you talked about the 80-20 rule and trying to tackle 20%, and then vice versa, but 20% of those heavy hitters, those top spend services within your account to get 80% of the savings. And then vice versa, that you can spend, 80% of your time to get, just 20% down. So going back to it a little bit, do you find that this process, and you kind of touched on it, that's an iteration process, it's not a once and done. You have to continuously drive towards this. Do you find that most companies are continuous, or are they just doing a once and done?
I mean, it's never done. You could do one off, like a spring cleanup, if you may, and you can like drive the cost significantly down. But then over time, just like your house gets a bit messier every day, it accumulates over time, and from time to time you have to do it again, or you have to do it as a continuous process. Just like tidying up your home, you don't wait just for the spring cleanup every year. You have to do it on a weekly basis, or so even daily, to continue that analogy.
My house daily, the kids, everything going on, you're always daily cleaning up, whether it's, and I'll give an analogy, right? So the kids come home, they drop their backpack onto the floor. No, it goes to a specific place. You go to your AWS environment, they spin up a service, an EC2, they're not using it anymore. No, you turn it down, and you continuously monitor this time over time. There's a bunch of tools. There's things that you can utilize. AWS offers services, budgets, alerts, visibility, but it's all a kind of a culture shift and doing the right thing for your AWS account for the cost savings benefit of everything.
Yeah, exactly. So you can do it. You should do it actually continuously. It's a cultural change that you have to drive throughout your engineering group, and yeah, they have to internalize all these things, all the technology that they have at their disposal to do these things right. and eventually you move out and then let them do it. So that's kind of my approach.
All right. So your approach as an expert around, not only the cost savings, but the performance around it, because you worked on and you kind of have this auto spotting. So you realize that some of the key benefits of doing it. I want to touch on the performance aspect. Performance is key because when everybody says, hey, we got to do cost optimization, they're like, okay, recommendation, you're only using this, knock it down to a T2. And you're like, okay, well, I can cut everything in half if you'd like your performance to really suck for your application, or you can do the right thing and optimize for a bigger, more efficient instance, but it also saves you a lot of time and money.
Yeah, I mean, what you can do is always reduce the size, but keeping an eye on the metrics that you have. So you reduce the size, but then as you notice that the latency, for example, goes up as you decrease the sizing, maybe at some point that increase in latency will maybe damage your business because customers like your application to be fast. And then that's kind of the point where you have to see, okay, take a judgment call, whether should I continue or do I stop here? I saved enough, and if I do it further, then I'm going to lose my customers. So yeah, that's kind of the and you may also want to do it the opposite way. So you may want to optimize performance with a slight increase in cost, as you said. So go a bit bigger on your capacity, but then if you get increased performance, that translates to better serving your customers. Because at the end, it's all about customers who keep you in the business.
Cristian, when you approach a customer approaches you from an expert perspective and they want to talk to you about a couple of things, they're like, oh my God, I'm spending so much money on my AWS bill, I need your help. Do you educate them right away and say, hey, listen, there's always cost savings things that we can do, but in some instances, your bill might run a little more, or you might spend a little more on this specific application because it's more geared towards the performance. It's all about business value and driving those decisions.
Yeah. So when I engage with them first, I try to talk to them to see what's important for them. So like what are the red lines where I shouldn't cross, like when it comes to latency and these kind of things, and also things that they want to do to benefit their business. So not just the cost, but also as we discussed, performance, and then based on that to see, okay, I can do these changes, and then I come up with a list of things that could be done also based on the priority that we discussed with the impact that you can drive and so on. So it's all about driving this fine balance between like cost and performance, and see what makes sense for the business they have. And it's a lot about how do I work with their team, with their engineers, so that they internalize these things. I don't want myself to be seen as, let's say, I go there and I save the world and then I'm out. What I try to do is instead teaching them how to fish and letting them fish themselves based on some tips and tricks that I give them. But then they do the fishing, and then they enjoy when they catch the fish, and then that makes this process more sustainable over time. So you get them to get more buy-in and get also some of these wins that they can be happy about.
The quick wins are always important for everybody and all the teams to understand that this is achievable and something that doesn't take a very long time to do. How important do you feel it is for these engineers or folks that you're talking to have the right training, IT skill sets, or even certifications?
And this seems like a good time to jump in and talk about today's sponsor, Veeam. How would you like to own, control, and protect your data in any cloud, anywhere, including AWS? Veeam Backup for AWS is a native solution to protect all of your AWS data. It's fully automated, set it, forget it within one platform, centrally managed. Veeam Backup for AWS is a robust solution from snapshots, replication, full recovery within AWS, granular file recovery, and including recover outside of AWS. Implement Veeam Backup for AWS today before you find out that your current solution isn't working. Now, how about we get you back to that podcast?
How important do you feel it is for these engineers or folks that you're talking to have the right training, IT skill sets, or even certifications?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to know, like for them to know all these things, to have an experience about the cloud. If they don't know anything about the cloud, I mean, you don't have much to do with them. Hopefully, they know their things. When it comes to the knowledge, I'm more of a big fan of learning by doing. I'm not against certifications. Don't get me wrong. I had actually a conversation about this topic the other week, and basically it's about when do you do those certifications and when do you start preparing for them in your life cycle, if in your experience as a cloud engineer, because I see all these people who have never touched the platform, the AWS console, but then they get to prepare for these certifications, study the theory, and pass the exams without having any practical experience with the platform. It's like having a surgeon who never touched a patient or never touched the scalpel or whatever it's called, and then have you done surgery like that. So it's more on first getting to get your hands dirty, learning by building things, and then after you've been using it for a while, then you do the certifications, and then you have also a better chance to get a right, let's say, to drive the right benefits of those certifications. And unfortunately, there are lots of people who do it the opposite, who start just learn the theory, but then never get to build anything. And then they are trying to look for jobs. And then when they apply for jobs, people don't really look at the certifications. They look at what they have built before. So, and yeah, it's also a bit how my past has been when I started to build tools. Autospotting was actually built out of my passion and will to learn the Go programming language and play with technologies like Lambda, because Lambda and Go were just emerging at the time, and I was looking for a project to learn these things, and I have been using AWS for a couple of years, and I just wanted to build something, and we were in this cost optimization process, and then got the idea to build something for Spot on EC2, but then the entire implementation was like built with Lambda and Go without even having a Go runtime for Lambda. And there were lots of things like platform limitations that I had to work around as I built it. And yeah, I still have workarounds for things that aren't available even today in the platform. So things like the marketplace billing for containerized serverless applications, which is not there yet. So yeah. And that's kind of my philosophy, to start building things, getting your hands dirty, and then after a while you build experience, you know things, then you start to get your certifications, like as a stamp of your knowledge, not before you start to do anything. Unfortunately,
so I want to jump in there on the certifications before we continue on. I agree with you a little bit on it, probably about halfway, because how I approached my certification back in 2015, I think was when I first got my AWS SA Pro certification. But I was only using like AWS for a fraction of the time, right? And I think was it 2014 I started, but I was using a little bit, and then I went and I did the book theory of doing the exam. But when I got to a question that I didn't understand, I went to AWS and I built it, right? I played around with it and I found out, oh, that's really true. And I went to the documentation and learned it. Now, I did pass the exam on the first try, but when I went for my developer one, I actually failed the exam. And then I was building and working on a project for a company. And I learned so much throughout this whole entire process of building this. Actually, it was a migration over to AWS. I learned so much that when I started realizing some of the exam questions for the developer one, I was like, oh my God, that makes sense. I know that. I know the reason to that. So that's where I agree with you, is that my hands-on experience helped me pass certain portions of it. I think the certification does allow you a foot in the door, but does not prove your expertise in it. Kind of really kind of solidifies that you know what you're doing, or kind of doing it, the work that you're trying to achieve. But I think in both cases, it helps folks. And in the other cases, it's okay to wait until you actually have hands-on experience.
Yeah, for sure. And there's always this the situation where you could start the certifications before doing anything, any practical. And like, unfortunately, the way they are done, it's just a theory exam with those questions, hundreds of questions. And I think at some point I got the impression that the pro exams are more testing your ability to focus and to read the full screen of text than the actual knowledge. But yeah,
you have like 2 minutes per question to get to read this entire paragraph, and you're like, wait a second, there's something here that doesn't fit, and you're just like, select,
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I prefer more if it was like an exam. Like, I used to have this Red Hat certification back in the days, like 5-10 years ago, and those exams you were in front of a computer building things. And I wish AWS was doing something like that, because then it just gets you into this building mindset, and gets you to practice these things as a builder, not necessarily just learning the theory for the technology, which you anyway need to know. But yeah, I think they are mainly because they are optimizing for training the solution architects in AWS, which rarely need to get their hands dirty, or they need to do it from time to time, but it's not the focus of the job. So as you go as a solution architect, it's all about knowing everything and having everything in your head and being able to give a quick answer based on incomplete information from the customer. So I think they are optimizing more towards that use case.
Cristian, I remember the hands-on exam. I did my CCNA, and it was, you actually had to write and type out the commands because there's only one way to do it. I think with AWS, even the SA Pro, there's multiple ways to get this done or to build something. There's so many different services. It's a lot. I mean, there's hundreds of services now, but there's different ways that others would do it. I think the difficulty there is that you would need a professional to grade each exam, since it's not a one solution type fits all.
I mean, it could be like you have a black box text testing for example, let's say build something that returns HTTP 404 or whatever if you do some sort of request. And then the way you implement that, doesn't really matter as long as you build it and it does what it's supposed to do. I mean, you could then check for things like, have you been using a Lambda, or having you been using an EC2 or a Fargate to build it? But as long as it gives the response, it's like in the real world when you build a product, as long as it works, like the customers don't really care how it's built under the hood, right? So
yeah, I would put in some cost optimization into that exam because you don't care how it's built, right? And you put it together. I would put that as one of your exam finals. Were you able to save costs on this entire exam and implementation? Let's find out.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. Cristian, let's talk a little bit more around the skills that it takes to do and tackle AWS, and not only the cost. We're talking about it. I mean, even from a FinOps perspective for cloud optimization or cost optimization, it's a culture change, right? You're coming in there and you're trying to talk to them about their environments and some of the things they do, yet you have others that might have been there a while, or they're used to doing things a certain way. How many times you run into this issue where you're just trying to educate them that, hey, listen, there's always better ways to do it. Here's what I recommend. Is there, does one size fit all?
I mean, one size never fits all, but there are a few sizes that fit pretty well.
I can go in an XXX large. That'll fit over me, no problem.
Yeah. So usually there are a few options that you can propose, and then you can discuss pros and cons of those options, and then see what fits best their business, right? So it's always coming back from their needs and working backwards again. And basically, yeah, you can build the things in different ways, but then when you build it, then you see, okay, this thing doesn't satisfy those requirements, and then you're forced to do something else. Even if maybe you have to compromise on some things, it's always the case. It's not an easy problem. In some cases, for example, you may have an application that you want to optimize for cost, but then it's a GPU workload of machine learning, which is it's really hard to do. And yeah, sometimes you just have to take the hit and pay for the things because it's inherent with the workload that you're tackling. So yeah.
So Cristian, let's talk a little bit about, we've talked the skill set. We've talked about talking and bringing in like an expert around some of these approaches. But if I want to do this on my own, are there other sources or engagements or folks, not even just internal, but external that I can reach out to? What are your suggestions? Are there communities that I should get involved in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's key to tap into the internet as a big community. And if you look at it, there are all sorts of channels where people gather together and then discuss these topics. For example, there is this Reddit for AWS where people ask all sorts of interesting questions, and other people just go and help them. And you should never go at it alone. If you can get help from others, try to do that as well. They're also on all sorts of platforms, like there are Slack rooms and channels for all sorts of technologies where you can go and get help if you need any particular things. I'm also a big fan of, especially as a solopreneur, I'm trying to leverage help whenever I can, because there's just me doing all these things, and I cannot do everything by myself. So yeah, communities are very important, and having a big network in the social media context, like on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Even if you just have a question and don't ask it in a community, you may ask your social network. And it's always, you will find somebody. If you have a large enough network, somebody will have run into that problem, and you actually get a pretty good responses from the communities that you're in.
I think communities are key in order to do your best, and not only within cloud optimization or anywhere around that, but there's a community for everything, from DevOps, FinOps, serverless communities. You can join so many of them to ask questions. Everybody's usually very helpful when to do it. And Cristian, you touched on it, on growing your network, even socially. If you got a question, post it out there. Even if they didn't run into it, people will ask some other ones. There's some cool AWS tools, AWS IQ, AWS Repost is another one that you can go and take a look at some of the things, the AWS documentation. You can always follow Cristian or myself and just tag one of us and say, hey, listen, we try. I don't know about you, Cristian, but I try to respond to almost everybody on social media to give them some type of feedback, if it's in a message or whatever it is, or direct them to the right person.
Yeah, for sure. And then people having access to somebody else's network also, people will just share it with their network. Like, you have also a lot of people now are being laid off from jobs, and they just ask for jobs, and then people just go and comment for reach. It's an interesting idea that you can help other people just by joining their conversation, because then the network will share that with much more people, and you get them better chances of getting the job back. So yeah.
Nope, I agree with you. So, Cristian, before we wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to, leave with the audience, bring them some more information, or even a topic that we didn't touch on?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of solopreneurship, like I was saying, I've seen nowadays all these things that can help you, and it's not just as a solopreneur, but in general as a knowledge worker. It's always good to look in, to keep an open eye on what's going on in the world and what kind of technologies become available. And I was like very happy when I got my hands on this new AI for ChatGPT, which is something that I've been playing with pretty much on a daily basis, and try to get it as a sort of helper for whatever I'm doing. And yeah, it's a trick that I started to use more and more for things like getting ideas for podcast episodes, or getting, if I write some content, getting it proofread or report mistakes, or like feedback on how the text looks like, as a sort of a free editor that I have, because I don't have anybody else. I mean, I would have to go and tap to the network, but then that would mean I disturb people from their work, and I could just go and ask this thing, like proofread this text and see what it thinks about it, and often find a lot of interesting things that I was not thinking about. So yeah, it's an interesting time to live in, and we have so many things at our disposal. And yeah, it's good to start looking at them and taking advantage of them as much as possible, because yeah, why not? It's a benefit of the world we live in.
I have not tested out ChatGPT yet. I'm going to. I have it on my to-do list. I've seen a lot of cool posts around it and some of the things folks are doing. I've never thought of actually asking it about some podcast topics. Wonder what it would come up with. I might have to post those. Yeah, like, hey,
actually, I started a podcast just a few weeks back, and I couldn't decide what to do, like what to talk about. And I just told it, like, give me a list of podcast episodes on this topic, and it gave me like 20 items, and then I could just go there and see, okay, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. And even for one of those items, you could dive deep and say, okay, this is the topic that I want to talk about. Tell me the most important things in this area. And it gives you like a list of bullets, what you can talk about. And this is great for a podcast. I mean, I wouldn't use it for like writing blog content, because that's something that I prefer to have my own style and things. Although I see people trying to do that as well, but you could do it for just getting bullets of ideas, of things to improve, of like proofreading things. So all sorts of interesting use cases that I see people using it for.
Cristian, let me ask you this. When you asked it for the podcast topics, where is ChatGPT getting this information from? Is it reading the internet and reading what's going on and all the information that's out there and then compiling a list? Yeah,
I mean, they crawl the entire internet, as far as I know, a few years back. I think the data is 1 or 2 years old, but then they indexed all this data and trained the model on it, so it has the entire information of the internet inside somehow. And it's interesting how you can ask it all sorts of things. Like, even I live in Germany, and I even asked it to write like an email in German to my doctor asking for like a COVID vaccination. So you say, write me an email for my doctor and that I want to get a vaccine for COVID. And then it came with a perfectly written email in German with all the formal words that you have to use with your doctor and things. And you can ask it in a very informal way. So it has all these things. I was amazed when I saw all these things. And there were people like doctors in the US. You have these doctors have to go and ask the insurance to cover some patient information. Yep. And I've seen a guy, a doctor, who was like, okay, write me an email for the insurance. I have this patient with this disease, and please justify this cost of the treatment, and give me a bunch of articles, of scientific articles that I use as a reference. And it came up with a perfectly formatted email for the insurance that the guy just copied and sent. So yeah, it's very powerful.
Cristian, I think I'm just might have to try it out after this podcast. And speaking of podcasts, do you want to share with everybody your podcast name and how they can find you?
Yeah, so I have this podcast on cloud optimization, which I call the Leaner Cloud. You can find it on any of the podcast platforms out there. I put it pretty much everywhere. So yeah, and so far I have just a few episodes. I just started it a month ago. I covered first episodes were about, the first episode was an introductory episode about myself, my journey. But then I went dive deep into savings plans and reserve instances were the next few episodes. So I did a very deep dive on those. And the fourth episode was about enterprise discount plans. And I'm going to continue these topics of cost optimizations with Spot, with Graviton, which are my main areas of expertise. I want to record those this or the next week, and then cover all sorts of topics when it comes to optimizing, not just for cost, but as I said, also performance with networking and all sorts of things, because it's all about this idea that when you teach something to somebody, you also get to learn it better.
Yep.
So I know a bunch of things about many of these topics, but when I prepare a podcast episode, I have to go and dive way deeper and sometimes learn a lot of new things or update my information about these topics compared to what I used to know before. So yeah, it's a good learning exercise also for me. And,
all right, everybody, you got to check out Cristian's podcast as he's growing more episodes, the number of followers. Yes, he just kicked it off, but I anticipate him and I will do another podcast later this year, recapping how things are going for him and including that leaner cloud. So, Cristian, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
As always, everybody, my name's John Myer. Thank you for watching the John Myer podcast. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify, because guess what? We're out of here.